Our faith is built on a foundation of real people and real events that are grounded in history. And I want us to look at the events surrounding the crucifixion of Jesus, from Lazarus to the Ascension, in chronological order. Our church calendar moves from Palm Sunday to Easter with Good Friday in between in 1 week. Here, I want to catch up on the other events that are critical to understanding what happened and why. And I want to do that through the eyes of a real person who can say, I was there. I saw what happened. I felt it. I experienced it. And I want to tell you about it. His name is John, the son of Zebedee, the son of thunder. He's a fisherman. He's tough as nails. He's the brother of James. He's the youngest of the apostles. He is the one who is called the beloved by Jesus. And John begins the story of the cross with the story of a dead man. He wants us to understand how that event can make a difference in your life and mine as we understand what the crucifixion is all about. John writes in chapter 11, verse 1, "Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, 'Lord, the one you love is sick.'" Now remember, John is saying, I was there in Bethany. Bethany is this poor little village on the eastern slopes of the Mount of Olives, about 2 miles outside of Jerusalem. And Lazarus is the brother of Mary. Now, Mary is a rock star in the spiritual world in her village and in Jerusalem. She is the one, if you'll recall, who poured perfume on the feet of Jesus. She poured it from an alabaster vial that she had. It was very, very precious. And it was in front of all the religious leaders of the day, and they were stunned and they wanted to get her out of there. But Jesus said, "You folks did not welcome me. You didn't even wash my feet," which is the custom. But here she washes my feet, and she washes them with her tears, and she anoints them with her oils, and she wipes them with her hair, because Mary loved him. And it's this Mary that now appears in this narrative with the brother Lazarus and her sister Martha. And Martha sent word to Jesus that Lazarus, the one you love, is sick. Jesus, you have stayed in our home. You shared meals with us. You're like family to us. You are a person that we rely on. We've had lots of talks together. Jesus had little platoons of people. He had friends that he could just relax with and talk about the events of the day. So Martha sends word that the one you love, what a title. The one you love. That's the title for all of us, you know. That Jesus loves us. He is the one who says, "You are my beloved. You are the one, you right now, you are the one that I love." But here, Martha sends word that he is gravely ill. Lazarus is sick. And she prays, "Will you come immediately?" But there's no answer. Silence. Absolute silence. In verse 4 we read, when he, Jesus, heard this, Jesus said, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it's for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. I want you to understand 3 things in this passage. And the first is the plan of God. He said, this will not end in death, but God's Son will be glorified, and God will be glorified as well. That God is going to authenticate his Son. Lazarus might die, but the end of the story will not end in death. And here again, we find that Jesus loved Martha and Mary and Lazarus, and he names them in order of their age. Martha is the oldest and Lazarus is the youngest. But here's what's really crazy about this. He loves them, but he stays 2 more days. He's in Capernaum, John tells us. He's up there 80 miles north of Bethany. It probably took at least 2 days for the messengers to reach him. And then he waits for 2 days, and then it will take at least 2 days for him to get down there to Bethany. And they're waiting. It's at least 6 days. And when Jesus waits, they all wait. We often find ourselves in situations where we wait on God. Where are you? When are you going to come? We've sent a request to you, but you're silent. But in the midst of all of that, I want us to understand, and John wants us to understand, that this is all a part of God's plan. He's in control. He knows what he's doing. In verse 14, we read, "So then he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. And for your sake, I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let's go to him." And then we read in verse 17, "On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother." Jesus tells them, and I don't know how he knows this, but he does, that Lazarus has died. And then he says, "For your sake," and then he says, "and I'm glad I wasn't there." John's saying, you've got to be kidding me. You're glad that Lazarus, the one you loved, is dead? Where's your sorrow? Why didn't we get there quicker? We arrived at least 4 days late. Now, the Jewish custom is to bury their dead on the same day before sunset. Bethany's 2 miles from Jerusalem. Lazarus has been buried on the day in which he died. And when word gets back to Jerusalem that Lazarus has died, and that he is the brother of Mary, the rock star who put her anointing oils on the feet of Jesus and wept for him, why, they head out there as fast as they can to comfort her and the family in their grief. In verse 20 we read, "When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home." "Lord," Martha said to Jesus, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Martha went out, Mary stays home. Martha says to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. He would still be alive. You could have done something. What took you so long? We waited, we watched, we prayed, but you did nothing." I mean, I wonder if you really loved him. Do you really love us? Where were you when we needed you most? Is this really the plan of God, that our brother would die? Now, here's the deal. All she knew, all she could see was the darkest moment. But when things look darkest, God is about his greatest work. Something very bad is going to turn into something very, very good. God has a plan. And I wonder if you've ever felt this, that where were you, Lord? What happened? Why am I waiting? Why didn't you answer my request when I asked you to? But God says, you have to understand, you've got a very limited, finite vantage point on what's taking place in your life. I understand everything from an eternal perspective. I have a plan. You make your requests, and then you release it, and you give it to me. Yes, I do have a plan. In verse 23, we read, Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even though he dies. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" Not only does God have a plan, but he has a promise. I was there, John says. I heard what he said. I saw the whole thing take place. Jesus tells Martha, your brother will rise again. He says that ego eimi, I am the resurrection. Ego eimi, I am the life. I hold the key to the power over life and death. Then he asks the big question, do you believe this? That's a pretty big promise. John's thinking this is unheard of. I mean, I don't know if I could believe that a man who's been dead for 4 days could come back to life. It's a pretty big question. And Jesus makes a pretty big promise. Whoever believes in me will never die again. Let's move on to chapter 11, verse 33. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, they replied. And Jesus wept. In this part of the narrative, Martha goes and gets Mary. You've got to see what Jesus is saying. He's here. He has come. He's arrived. And when Mary sees Jesus, she sinks to the ground and bursts into tears. This is the second time that she has cried on her knees before him. And she's saying the same thing. Where were you? What took you so long? If you had been here, he would still be alive. She's in trauma. She's in shock. She's in disbelief. She doesn't know what to do. But Jesus, when he saw her pain and the pain of the people who were with her, he had pain. We find here the shortest verse in the Bible. The result of fallenness and sin and evil in our lives is pain, it's weeping, it's sorrow. And when he saw her weep, he wept. It's the shortest verse in the Bible. Jesus wept. He wept 3 times. He wept over Jerusalem because the people wouldn't listen. He weeps here over Lazarus. And he weeps in Gethsemane when the disciples fell asleep. He weeps because they are not paying attention to who he is and what he's doing. And he weeps for us when we don't trust or believe. But this is who God is. He deeply cares for us, even when we wonder and we question. It's okay to wonder and question God. He loves us. I love you in your confusion, in your shock, in your disbelief. Why is this all happening? I love you. This is the promise of God to you and to me. In verse 40, we read, Then Jesus said, Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. And when he had said this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. Not only is there the plan of God and the promise of God, but there is the power of God. John's saying, I was there. Jesus said, you're going to see the glory of God and the glory of my Son. Go to the tomb. Take away the huge stone that seals Lazarus in that tomb. Now, Martha says to him, but Lord, by this time, there's going to be a bad odor in there. He's been there 4 days. The body is decaying and rotting and decomposing. The tomb is reeking with the stench of death. But Jesus said, take away the stone. Then, John says, I heard him pray to his Father. And you know what his prayer was? That we might believe. I heard him say that. This is all about us, that we might have faith. And then he said in a loud voice, Lazare, duro edzo, in the imperative. Lazare, duro edzo, come here. A loud voice. I mean, a quiet order would have done it. But God decided to show the power of his Son and the glory of his Son. This isn't a resuscitation where somebody's been dead for a matter of minutes. This is a resurrection. A dead man, dead for 4 days, is now alive and comes out of a tomb. This is a resurrection. It's the final great miracle that John shares with us. It's what prepares the way for the crucifixion. I mean, what good is a plan and what good is a promise if there's no power? Jesus knows that Lazarus can't get out of the tomb by himself. He needs the power of God. Our lives are like that. We need God's plan, we need His promise, and we need His power in our lives. That God could come in and do only the things that God can do. He's the creator God. He created you and me. He created the world. He scattered the stars in the universe. That God of power is there that day in Bethany. And John says, I saw it. So there's the plan of God, there's the promise of God, and there is the power of God. Now, what happens next? Well, I want to briefly share with you 3 things that I think this story is all about. And we read the first one in John chapter 11, verse 44. The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, take off the grave clothes and let him go. The first thing that Jesus does is he asks the family and friends to unbind Lazarus. John is saying, I was there. A figure appeared in the doorway of the tomb. A dead man was now alive, and he came out. But he's still in his grave clothes, strips of linen around his hands and feet and body and face. He's alive, but he's still bound. So Jesus told us to take off his grave clothes. We all need each other. This is what Jesus is trying to tell them right now. We need each other. Christianity is not a solo sport. No one would try to climb Mount Everest alone. And sometimes when we're in a hole and we can't get out, we all need a hand to reach down, to extend down to us and pull us out. We were made to unwrap each other. Christianity is a family of people that move through life together. And if you don't have that kind of little platoon or a small group or accountability group, get one. Get your team together. It's the first thing that's taking place here. The second we read in verse 45, therefore, many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did believed in him. As he said, do you believe that I'm the resurrection, that I have power over death itself? Do you believe this? Now, this is a big question. Jesus is saying there is no hope in a human solution. Life is too big for you. It gets too out of control. Some of you are lost in a place without hope this very moment, in a valley right now. And you can't move from darkness to light and from bad to good apart from the miraculous activity of God in our lives. Do you believe this? I remember back in the days of Evangelism Explosion, where Jim Kennedy, the pastor from Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church, developed 2 questions to ask people. The first one was, have you come to the place in your life that if you were to die tonight, you would go to heaven? And most people say, yeah, I think so, I probably would. And then here's the big one. If you did die tonight and you were standing before God and God said to you, why should I let you into my heaven? What would you say to him? And after asking hundreds and hundreds of people this question, I can tell you that most people say, well, because I'm a good person, you know. I mean, I know I've got flaws and I've done some things wrong. I've made some big mistakes, but generally I'm a good person. God grades on a curve, and on the curve, I'm in the front half of the line. I'm not an axe murderer or a drug dealer. I'm a pretty good person. But that's what the rich young ruler said to Jesus. Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all of your heart, all of your soul, all of your mind, all of your time. And if that were not enough, here's the kicker. And love people, your neighbors, as yourself. And he walked away crestfallen. The standard of God is too high. The answer to that question, what you would say to God, is because I believe that Jesus died on a cross for me. He gave his life for me. And I put my trust in that because I can't save myself. I can't get myself out of the tomb. I need the power of God to do that. And finally, there's one other thing that I think we need to see here, and that is that there's big trouble ahead. John chapter 11, 53. So from that day on, they made plans to put him to death. And we read in John chapter 12, verse 10, something really interesting. So the chief priests made plans to put Lazarus to death as well, because on account of him, many of the Jews were going away and believing in Jesus. Because of this miracle, very shortly, there is big trouble ahead. You see what's happening here? The people are so excited. They go back to Jerusalem, the ones that were comforting Mary and Martha, and they witnessed this miracle. And John is saying, they went and told the Pharisees what happened. And when they told them what they had seen and what they had experienced, from that day on, Jesus was as good as a dead man. He came from Bethany then into the city of Jerusalem. It's called the triumphal entry. But they were plotting to kill Jesus, and not only to kill Jesus, but get rid of the evidence. They wanted to kill Lazarus as well. Exhibit number 1. For these early believers, their faith is going to get very, very serious to them. Do you believe this? They're going to have to answer that question under persecution. And as you know, on the night of his trial, that Peter denies him, and so do the rest of the apostles, except for John, who stays with Mary, the mother of Jesus. I mean, it's one thing to hear the gospel. It's one thing to understand it. It's one thing to say, I believe it. It's another thing to embrace it and trust it when the bombs are falling, when life is at stake. It's when we have to move from Christianity being a spiritual enhancement in our lives to a lifestyle where it gets consequential. It makes a difference, where there's fire in our bones. We're all aware of what's happening in the Ukraine at this very moment. And I wonder, with those little children and the mothers and the young soldiers and the parents, what they're going through. They're sitting in makeshift bomb shelters in the bottom of buildings, and they have to answer that question. Do you believe this? In the midst of all of this badness, do you believe that Jesus is the resurrection, that he has a plan, that he has a promise, and that he has power? It's in those difficult times in our lives, with the loss of a loved one or a financial failure or a big moral mistake, that we really have to ask that question. Do you believe this? Do you? Do you believe this? So we need each other. We have to answer the question, the big question, do you believe this? And our faith is to be consequential, to make a difference, because for the believers now, life is going to get consequential. I hope you'll join us for the triumphal entry and see what happens there as Lazarus and his family lead the parade into Jerusalem as we follow the events surrounding the crucifixion.